What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and thank you guys for tuning into another episode of the BnG podcast, episode 114. And before we get too deep into this episode, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this episode, if you're checking us out on YouTube, be sure to comment, be sure to like, and be sure to subscribe. On the road to 1.2K followers, trying to get to 2K subscribers before the NFL draft, and you see that we pushing out the content. You see that we pushing out the content, guys. So I'm trying to do my part. So I just need you guys to do your part. Hit that sub button and be sure to keep the interactions going in the chat as well. So let's get into this episode, man, to give you a timestamp as I do for all of my episodes. Today is Sunday, March 10th, 2024. And we're one day before the legal tampering period for free agency in the 2024 NFL new league year starts. So the new league year essentially starts on Wednesday, but the NFL in the last couple of years have trying to take a basketball swag, trying to take a little of the NBA swag and give guys a legal tampering period before these guys officially sign these contracts on Wednesday. So starting tomorrow at noon, you'll hear reports infiltrating social media, infiltrating ESPN, infiltrating the NFL world, where these guys are starting to agree to deals. You've seen a lot of it, or a few of it, in the coming days or in the previous days with Kevin Byard and things like that. Those are guys that were waived or weren't on the roster last year. But yeah, tomorrow is the official start of the legal tampering period for the 2024 season, with the new league year set to start on Wednesday. So a lot of these contracts that you're going to hear guys agreeing to terms on in the next 2 days can officially be signed on Wednesday. So without further ado, episode 114 of the BnG podcast, we're going to be giving you guys a free agency preview. So here's our free agency preview, and thank you guys for tuning into the channel. And let's get into it. You know you come to BnG for the most raw, uncut, and unfiltered analysis. So I'm going to try to give you that, but I'm going to try to give you the most in-depth and the most knowledgeable analysis, because I know some of you guys aren't into free agency, into the offseason like we are, and into all of the nuances of the NFL like we are. But guess what? You can use us as your free agency guy. And that's what I hope that you guys plan to do. So sit back, relax, eat that popcorn, whatever you need. But I'm going to try not to keep you long. But I got a lot of information for you. So according to Over the Cap, the Commanders have $92 million in cap space. That's number one in the NFL. They have the most money to spend going into the 2024 free agency period. And yeah, they have the most money to spend by a pretty fair margin over the New England Patriots. But they started making moves last week. I know I said the new league year starts this week and everything, but you've seen teams across the NFL. I mentioned some of the teams, some of the players that have already signed prior to the legal tampering period. You see teams, you see organizations all throughout the NFL started to get a head start on the new league year, and Washington is one of them. Washington did not abstain from making moves. So over the last week, they've cut tackle Charles Leno Jr., offensive guard, offensive center Nick Gates, and tight end Logan Thomas, and then they signed a tight end in Zach Ertz. So that's what they did over the last week to start, getting the wheels turning on, their roster construction. And one thing that really excites me about this offseason, because if you've been a Washington Commander, a Washington Redskin, a Washington football team fan for as long as I have, especially in the early 2000s, we were regarded as the offseason champs, right? Vinny Serrato and Dan Snyder, they were willing to give anybody a bag, even if that player was over the hill, if they didn't match the scheme, if their production was regressed. If they were a big name, you were giving them the bag, right? But one reason why I'm not particularly opposed to being an offseason champion this year is because, guys, tomorrow is the day that we finally get to see Adam Peters start to put his imprint and his vision on the roster that he hopes has the potential of competing for Super Bowls in and year out. So tomorrow is my official period for, the holy trifecta of, Josh Harris, Adam Peters, and Dan Quinn. Tomorrow marks the start of that era. We know we have Josh Harris has been here nearly a year, and we have Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, that were hired over a month ago. But tomorrow is the day where they start to put, their fingerprints, their foundation on what we want the Washington Commanders be for the 2024 season and on into the future, which is hopefully a consistent contender, a consistent winner. And yeah, tomorrow is the start of that. And that's why tomorrow is so exciting for me. So after those moves that they made last week that I previously mentioned, some positions of need that I think going into tomorrow that we need to address are offensive tackle and offensive guard. So essentially offensive lineman as a whole. Edge, which is a defensive end, a linebacker, and not a linebacker, the linebacker position, because we need as many linebackers as we can get. Excuse me, and the cornerback position as well. So that's a lot of needs. That's a lot of needs. But when you got $92 million in cap and you got the most money in the NFL, you should be a kid in the candy store. And I think that's how Adam Peters is feeling right now. I think that's how Adam Peters is feeling right now. I can imagine that he probably can't sleep tonight. He probably can't sleep tonight because this is his first time as a head, football evaluator, as the head of football operations in an organization. So this is the first time that, his sole vision is what we're going to see on the NFL field. This is the first time that he sees that. Boy, I would love to be in that position. I'm just over here being an armchair GM. I'm just over here being a YouTube GM. And I'm excited for it. So I know that he is. And one thing that, excites me about this is that in those years prior, when we were off-season champs in the early 2000s, we were off-season champs, but those never translated to us being champions on the field. Shit, that never translated to us being regular season winners on the field. But I think that with these knowledgeable football minds that we have in now, like a Lance Newmark, like a Adam Peters, like a Dan Quinn, and a savvy businessman who isn't going to infiltrate himself into all football operations like a Josh Harris, I think that we have the potential of being not only all-season champs, but that success that we get in March translating into September, translating to what we see on the field. And that's what is exciting to me about tomorrow and, this entire offseason. You see, I done signed up to be a season ticket member. You see, I already signed up for the 2024 because I believe that new days are to come as a Washington Commander. So without further ado, man, let's get into this episode. I know you come over here for that analysis, so we about to give it to you. The Commanders are going to have around 30 restricted and unrestricted free agents from their 2023 roster. So what does that tell you? I'm going to tell you what it tells me. As I mentioned, I know that Adam Peters is excited about tomorrow. I know he's excited to be the GM. But that tells me that in the GM acquisition recruitment meetings and things of that, when Adam Peters met Josh Harris down in Miami, Josh Harris gave him a screenshot of the roster, handed it to him. You know what Adam Peters did? He balled that bitch up and Kobe it straight into the trash can. He Kobe'd it straight into the trash can. Along with a couple of these moves that he made, cutting a Charles Leno, cutting a Nick Gates, cutting a Logan Thomas. We see that he's not tendering guys like the John Scooter Harris, Derek Gore, because these guys don't belong on the NFL roster. These are UFL players at its finest. Adam Peters knows that. Adam Peters knows that. And he's simply telling you that with these moves. He's just telling you that with these moves. I believe that that's one of the reasons why he was most excited. Yes, he has the cap to do whatever he wants to the roster, but he's drawing this from a blank canvas. He has the potential to make beautiful art from a blank canvas because this roster was fucking dog shit. This roster was ass, and he knows it. Guys, 30 restricted and unrestricted free agents from 1 year from an NFL roster. There's only 53 active players on a roster every Sunday. So that means you're going to have less guys that you had signed playing against the Dallas Cowboys in the regular season finale. You have less guys on the roster now than you have off of it. You don't typically see that in the NFL. But I understand it. I get it. Trust me, I'm not complaining by any means. When you're picking number 2 in the draft, that tells you that you are one of the worst rosters in the NFL. That tells you that this roster needs a fucking overhaul. A complete overhaul. And Adam Peters seems to agree with the moves that he just made in these last couple of weeks. He seems to agree. Some of the notable free agents from the 2023 roster. Wide receiver Curtis Samuel. Running back Antonio Gibson. Cornerback, Kendall Fuller. kicker Joey Sly, quarterback Jacoby Brissett, safety Cam Curl, defensive ends Casey Tuell and James Smith-Williams, and linebacker Cody Barton. First and foremost, keep Cody Barton as far away from my fucking team as possible. That experiment has ran its course, and boy, was it an ugly fucking course. It was a fucking obstacle course that I never wanted to complete, that we never finished. Because it was the most difficult, rigorous obstacle course of all time. That's how Cody Barton made linebacker play seem in 2023. So keep him as far away from my roster as possible. As possible. And to be quite frank with you guys, out of all those notable free agents, I don't really see any of them coming back. Maybe James Smith-Williams. But any other guys, I know at some point in their tenure, you consider them to be a key factor or a key contributor in the Washington Commanders. Newsflash, they ain't that in 2024. They not that. If I would have recorded this episode maybe a week or two ago, I might have considered, Cam Curl, potentially re-signing with the Washington Commanders. But if you haven't checked out our last episode on YouTube on reasons why we believe that Cam Curl's days as a Commander might be numbered, go ahead and check that out. And as of right now, on Sunday, March 10th, 2024, I don't think that Cam Curl is going to be returning as a Washington Commander, despite, him being homegrown talent, despite him being developed, despite him being a good player. I just simply don't see it back. It seems like Adam Peters and the guys in the front office are willing to let Cam Curl hit free agency. And more times than not, when you're willing to let a player hit free agency, when you have the capability of extending them before, once he hit free agency, as I mentioned in that episode, that player tends to have too much pride to suck it up and come back no matter what the contract looks like. Unless you're giving them a whole bunch more money than the market value entails, those players rarely tend to come back. And there's been other information coming out and other news droppings that have come out since my episode. I think that, Ben Standen had did a mock, free agency signing article and things of that nature. We had Cam Curl potentially hypothetically signing for like 3 years for $31 million. And Greg Curl, Cam's father, laughed it out. He hit it with a hysterical laughing meme. Which I get, he's in his family. He wants Cam to get top dollar and things of that nature. But that told me that Cam Curl ain't giving us no hometown discount. And not only isn't he giving us a hometown discount, he's going to wherever the highest bidder is. And when you have guys like Percy Butler, Quan Martin, and Derek Forrest already on the roster, you've invested a lot of draft capital and a lot of young guys into the safety room. So for me, them letting Cam Curl hit the market, some of the things that he's tweeted in the last week, his father saying that he wanted $20 million last offseason and things of that nature, I don't see Cam Curl coming back. And most of these guys aren't coming back because they simply bums. They guys that don't belong in the NFL roster, as I mentioned. But Kendall Fuller, he isn't a bum. No, Kendall Fuller, you're not a bum. But Kendall Fuller's getting closer and closer to that age 30 season, which is kind of like, we always talk about that age 30 year for running backs. But getting past age 30 isn't always the kindest to cornerbacks as well, and I understand it. That's you keeping up with world-class athletes that run 4.3s and you moving backwards, right? You need spring chickens in there. You need elite athletes in there. And, as Kendall Fuller gets closer and closer to 30, this was a guy that was never an athletic specimen. He was more technique-based. And he's a good player. Don't get me wrong. Kendall Fuller is not a bum. But he's more zone-heavy, scheme-dependent, where he excels a lot in cover 3 and cover 4. While, Dan Quinn, in his early years as a defensive coordinator with the Seattle Seahawks, he did play a lot of cover 3. In his last 3 years with the Dallas Cowboys, he was go check the numbers. He's straight up man. He was a straight man defensive coordinator. Now, they did mix in some other coverages and things of that nature, but Joe Witt as well. Their scheme seems to rely a lot on, their outside corners playing a lot of man coverage, and that simply isn't Kendall Fuller. Like I said, he's a good corner. I think NFL.com or ESPN has him ranked as the number 1 cornerback on the market. So that tells you, that's more telling you about this free agent class than it is about Kendall Fuller. Because he is a scheme-dependent type of player. And in a heavy man scheme where you need elite athletes that are going to run with these wide receivers across the field, down the field, wherever you need to go. I don't think that Kendall Fuller is that. No shade to Kendall Fuller, because he still is a good player, but I don't think that, his elite technique and things of that nature is going to supersede and, shadow some of the athletic limitations that he's had since he's come out of college, coming out of Virginia Tech, and he's only gotten older. So you would assume that, he's gotten less athletic, slower and things of that nature. So I don't necessarily see us bringing him back as well. More so because of a scheme fit. Antonio Gibson is good as gone. We never saw 2020 Antonio Gibson again. And I think that Curtis Samuel, while he is good friends with Terry McLaurin, that was one of the reasons that, he was bought in the first place. I think that Curtis Samuel, as he gets closer to 30, I think that he understands that his prime years are, dwindling down as well. And I think that he's going to take this season to, potentially sign with a contender that has a need for a playmaker that is dynamic with the ball in his hands, which Curtis Samuel is. A la like the Kansas City Chiefs, who are desperate for wide receiver help, and the Buffalo Bills, who low-key, as quiet as it's kept, is desperate for wide receiver help as well. So I think that Curtis Samuel is going to pair himself with a contender, so I don't necessarily see us bringing him back. And as I mentioned, James Smith-Williams is the only one that I really see us bringing back. I like James Smith-Williams. This is a guy that was brought in the 7th round. He's a hard worker. He's productive, especially for a 7th rounder. Shit, at one point in 2023, he had just as many sacks as a Commander as Chase Young did. And this is a guy that can kick in and play, defensive end, but he can kick in sub packages and give you some interior pass rush as well. At the defensive end position, while he doesn't have a lot of juice as a pass rusher, he's solid holding up the edge as a run defender. And I think that versatility is something that, I think that versatility is something that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters are going to marvel and admire. And I think that's one of the reasons why James Smith-Williams might be one of the few free agents that we might actually potentially bring back into the fold. Now, time to put on my mock GM hat. Time to put on my suit and tie. As I told you, I know Adam Peters is so excited, and I'm super excited just to drop this YouTube video, just to tell you some of the things that I would do, some of the signings that I would make if I was Adam Peters with the new league year, with the new league year starting tomorrow. Soon as the ball drops tomorrow, I'm making all of these phone calls. Because guess what? With $92 million in cap, I know that Adam Peters told you guys on Grant and Danny that he didn't plan on spending a lot of the cap. He didn't plan on spending a lot of money. He planned on building through the draft. Well, I'm calling cap on that. Sorry. I apologize. I'm calling cap on that. And the reason that I'm calling cap, I do believe that he's going to build through the draft. But when you got $92 million in space, there's a minimum that you have to spend every year. And this is, like I mentioned before in the episode, this is Adam Peters' first chance to give the vision and the footprints of the ultimate Super Bowl team that he has always wanted. He has always wanted. He's never been the head football evaluator anywhere until now. So guess what? If we start competing and contending for Super Bowls, he's going to get that credit. So why would he delay that a year? Why would he potentially delay that a couple of years down the line, kicking the can down the line, when he can do that right now? When he can start getting new blood into here right now? But he can start getting dynamic players in here right now to set the culture, to set the tone. Because guess what? You got to start somewhere. So I went back to see how the free agency class went for the 2007 49ers, where Adam Peters was, John Lynch's right-hand man when they first came in, along with Kyle Shanahan. But if you paid attention, the 49ers in that offseason, they brought in a lot of guys that were familiar with the Kyle Shanahan system, a lot of guys that he had coached as an offensive coordinator in Atlanta, in Cleveland, and things of that nature. In Washington, they brought in Logan Paulson. So they were bringing in guys that were familiar with the coach, because that allows you to inject your culture. That allows you to inject your standard. That allows you to inject your scheme and translate your scheme easy. So I understood that, and that's something that, I took in mind when I created this potential free agent signing list, or this mock free agent signing list, because when you're able to infiltrate your culture in the early years, that's when you're able to accelerate yourself into becoming that contender. Because guess what? You're starting to do the right thing, and you're starting to do the thing that everybody is doing. everybody's on one accord with what they believe. Whether it's right or wrong or indifferent, whether it is actually right or wrong, if everybody believes that it's right, they're going to buy in. And that's where, the baseline and the foundation for these contending teams start. Guess what? That was in 2017 when they really infiltrated those guys. And they weren't dynamic players by any means. It was like Logan Paulson. It was Pierre Garçon, who was over the hill. It was a couple of linemen that had been with, Cal in Atlanta. But it wasn't any huge names. But those were guys that were culture setters and really got the ball rolling on what the San Francisco 49ers are today. So without further ado, let's get into these signings, man. Let's get into these signings. And this first signing is a signing that I really think is going to happen. I think that this is one of the most realistic signings that we can make, or that have, the rumors have been floating around about this guy. And that's defensive end Dorance Armstrong from the Dallas Cowboys, who has 13 and a half sacks over the last 2 years. And I'm bringing him in. These are my numbers at a 3-year, $27 million deal, and he's entering his age 27-year-old season. Let me tell you about Dorance Armstrong, man. This is a guy that had 8.5 sacks in 2022, which was his breakout year. He had 5 sacks in 2023, which was a little bit of a regression, but I think that he improved as a run defender this year. He brings a lot of scheme versatility, the same thing that I mentioned with James Smith-Williams. And if you're able to bring in both of those guys, you fill in essentially 4 positions. You fill in 2 defensive end positions because the cupboard is bare there outside of KJ Henry and Andre Jones Jr. right now, and you don't know really what you're going to get out of those guys. But you also fill in guys and Dan Quinn used him in this role as well. And think about Dan Quinn. This is a guy that told you he believes in a lot of positionless football, giving guys advantages. You saw in past seasons, he was lining Michael Parsons up over the center. Well, guess what? He did the same thing with Dorance Armstrong, using his quickness over guards and centers and things of that nature. So they were filling 2 interior sub-package pass rushers as well. And this is a guy that has a lot of juice. He's versatile, as I mentioned. He gives you just as much in the pass as he does in the run. And this is a guy that really broke out with Dan Quinn. So he's able to come in and give you what we believe. And he's been under Joe Witt as well. So he's able to translate the scheme, translate the playbook, and let you guys know what Dan Quinn wants from day one, which is important in setting the culture. So defensive end Dorance Armstrong is my first signing that I'd like to mention in today's episode. Our second episode, we staying with the edges. I think this guy's a more of an edge because Joe Witt did tell you they're building the Commanders defense. They don't necessarily know what the formations, what the schemes are going to look like. So Josh Uche is a guy that can get down. He's more of a rotational pass rusher, but he gives you more in the run game than Bryce Huff. So I'm here to tell you that Bryce Huff is not on this list. And I know that's a popular name floating amongst Washington Commanders Twitter. Because they saw his pass rush rate and everything of that nature. Well, guess what? Bryce Huff defends the run just about as good as me. And I think that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters want versatile football players that aren't pigeonholed in the scheme, that don't essentially just do one thing. And Josh Uche is that kind of guy. This is a guy that had 11.5 sacks in 2023. Now, he fell off a lot in 2022, he had those 11.5 sacks. Now, he fell off a lot in the 2023 season, only having 3 sacks, but he had to deal with a lot more double teams with Matthew Judon missing a lot of the year. But when he was getting a lot of those one-on-ones, 11.5 sack season. This is a guy who Spot Rack, has his market value as 2 years, $16.5 million. It's a little over $8 million per year, and I would give him the same. I think that he's worth around that market value with his potential and his production so far, and he's going into his age 26-year-old season. So this is a guy who not only infiltrates that bare-ass defensive end room, but this is a guy that's coming from New England, coming from, the Bill Belichick defense. So, he knows how to play the football the right way. And he's young with potential to grow, which is exciting. So, my first 2 signings, I went ahead and revamped that defensive end, that edge room with Dorance Armstrong and Josh Uche. My third signing, which is potentially my biggest signing as far as, the lucrativeness of the deal. Is lucrativeness a word? But how expensive of this deal we're going to be signing this potential player to. And that's guard Jonah Jackson from the Detroit Lions. This is a guy that I'm willing to sign to a 4-year, $72 million deal. That's about $18 million a year. And he's going into his age 27 season. So guess what? All three guys that I mentioned so far are guys that are only signing their second contract. These are guys that are about to hit the prime of their NFL career. So if you want to accelerate this rebuild, you get young guys that are already established. And Jonah Jackson is that. Jonah Jackson was on one of the best offensive lines in the last couple of years. Think about what the Detroit Lions did this past season with the smash mouth style of football they played, and then getting creative on the edges with the. Think about their run game. You know, all of us were, hit, myself including, giving Ben Johnson all the acclaim. But guess what? He couldn't do it without offensive linemen like Jonah Jackson. And if you see a guy like Kevin Dotson, who isn't as good as Jonah Jackson, signing for $16 million a year just 2 days ago, I think that, $18 million a year for a guy of Jonah Jackson's talent is appropriate. This is a guy about 320 pounds. He's an elite mover in space. He allowed 2 sacks last season. As I mentioned, he's young, only signing his second contract. He's great on the outside. Think about some of those stretch runs where he was pulling with Jahmyr Gibbs, hitting the outside. Those outside zone type runs that they were running in Detroit. And guess what? He has experience with our assistant GM, Lance Newmark. Lance Newmark was in the Detroit Lions front office when they drafted Jonah Jackson. Oh my God, seems like a match made in heaven. And one of the reasons why I'm taking Jonah Jackson over a guy like Michael Winnahu, who a lot of the people in Commanders Twitter are, wanting to bring in and things of that nature, is because Jonah Jackson knows exactly what he is. He's a left guard, and that's the weakest position on our offensive line right now. I'm tired of hearing positional flex. I just want a guy that does his job amazingly. I just want a guy that does his job really well, and Jonah Jackson fits that bill. Jonah Jackson fits that bill, and Jonah Jackson is a guy that's young enough to infiltrate and let you guys know what winning football is, because he's been a part of a winning football program in the last 2 years, especially with this year with the Detroit Lions. And yeah, he's been a part of that, personnel that shifted the culture in Detroit. And they needed a whole culture infiltration in Detroit, and he was a part of it. So I see no reason why he can't come to Washington and do it again. Now, moving back to the defensive side of the ball. If I was the GM, I would sign linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair to a 3-year, $18 million deal. That's my numbers. He didn't have a market value on Spot Track. Essentially giving him a $6 million annual average value per year contract. And this is a guy that, is going into his age 27 season as well. This is a guy that Adam Peters drafted, so he has experience with Adam Peters. He's versatile. I would be bringing him in to play the strong side linebacker position, because the name that I'm going to mention next will be playing the middle linebacker position. Because, we need a whole revamp in that linebacker room. But this is a guy that had 163 tackles last year. He's only 27. He's been on great defenses with the 49ers. He was the leading tackler with the Titans last year. And he's been around good defensive minds. He's been around a Mike Vrabel. He's been around, a D'Amico Ryans, excuse me. And this is a guy that's a big hitter. Go look at some of his hits in a rotational role with the San Francisco 49ers. And if you look back at some of those highlights, remember that he was doing that only getting about 50 to 60% of the snaps. And Joe Witt told you he wanted guys that's going to run to the ball and hit. And that's Azeez Al-Shaair's game. I think he fits a Joe Witt defense perfectly. Somebody that will crack you in your motherfucking nose till that shit bleeds. Straight downhill. I'm not saying that he's this crazy great player or anything, but as far as infiltrating a hard-nosed type of player into a hard-nosed type of culture, Azeez Al-Shaair is that type of guy. And if you saw in the past, I didn't feel amazingly about it, but if you can remember in this past postseason, because the Tennessee Titans were eliminated, I think it was the first game that the 49ers played. I think it was against the Green Bay Packers, where Azeez was out there on the field with his old teammates, going through the old pregame huddle with the linebackers and things of that nature. So that tells you that he's a teammate guy. That tells you that, the guys, rally around him, and the guys that he plays with love him. So, I mean, why wouldn't you bring that in if you're trying to set a tone and build a culture, especially if Adam Peters was a part of the team that drafted him? Next, I would be bringing in linebacker, and this is probably the biggest name. And hear me out when I say this, because I know a lot of you guys are going to say, oh, you're a little washed up, you're a little over the hill. Linebacker Bobby Wagner. I would be bringing him in for a 1 year, $7 million deal, essentially the same deal that he signed with the Seattle Seahawks last year. And let me tell you why, because even though he's going into his age 34-year-old season, this is simply a culture move. Because he was still productive last year with over 180 tackles. Granted, a lot of them were downfield. But this is Dan Quinn's baby, y'all. This was the leader of Dan Quinn's defense when he was just in his incubator stage. When he was just wet behind the ears defensive coordinator in Seattle. Bobby Wagner was the guy calling the shots. Bobby Wagner was his eyes and ears. Bobby Wagner was his teacher's pet. Bobby Wagner was his protege. Bobby Wagner was his translator on the field. And guess what? Bobby Wagner would be able to do the same thing here. And I'm only signing him to a 1 year deal, but he was productive last year. And shit, when you have the linebacker play that we've been having over the course of the last couple of years, we'd be damn fools to turn our nose up at Bobby Wagner. He could be 176 years old. 176-year-old Bobby Wagner would give us some better linebacker play than the shit we've seen in the last couple of years. And then bringing in a guy like Bobby Wagner to play the middle, and then Azeez Al-Shaair to play the strong side linebacker position that allows you to shift a guy like Jamin Davis over to his natural weak side linebacker position where he's able just to see ball, hit ball, track ball, get ball. Because he's already told you he ain't got the IQ to think. He just need to be a see ball, get ball type player. Dan Quinn has already mentioned that, they want to use him as in the pass rush game as well, use him as a pass rusher and things of that nature. Well, guess what? Guess which one of the off-ball linebacker positions pass rushes the most? The weak side linebacker position, which is Jamin Davis is a natural. I've been telling you guys for 3 years. If you've been a Bleeding BnG fan from day one, that's why you come over here for the most raw, uncut, and undeath. But guess what? We give you the most knowledge as well. We've been telling you that Jamin Davis has been a weak side linebacker since we drafted him in 2021. So bringing in a guy like Azeez Al-Shaair and Bobby Wagner would allow you to put him in his rightful role and watch him flourish. Bringing in these guys are going to help the team around him get better. Now, moving on to my last two signings of this episode, I would take a flyer on cornerback Jeff Okudah, who last played with the Atlanta Falcons, on a 2 year, $10 million deal, which is about $5 million per year. Spot Rack right now has him at a $14 million per year. I think that's a typo, or they never really updated it from the fact that he was a number 3 pick in the 2020 draft. And while he hasn't necessarily lived up to the hype, this is a guy that's going into his 25-year-old season. And to me, last year, he showed that he recovered from that Achilles injury pretty well. He seemed to be very sticky in coverage in some games. I think that he covered Justin Jefferson just about as good as, not Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison just about as good as any corner did this past season. And he showed me that he still has some of those elite traits that I said that Kendall Fuller was lacking, despite him tearing his ACL. Jeff Okudah ran a 4.3. While he might not be that now, he still showed that he has plenty enough speed. He gave Terry McLaurin a hard time last year. Outside of a couple play action routes and things of that nature, Terry McLaurin had a pretty hard time getting free of Jeff Okudah. And this is a guy that Lance Newmark, who I mentioned with Jonah Jackson, was on the team when they brought in Jeff Okudah in 2020 as well. So he has experience with Lance Newmark as well. So these guys know what these guys in the front office are looking for. They're able to inject this into the Washington Commander franchise. And last but not least, I know this episode was pretty long, and this is how I'm going to leave you guys today. I haven't signed wide receiver Noah Brown. He's 6'2", 215 pounds. I have signing him to the spot rack deal, or the spot rack market value deal of a 3 year, $16 million deal. It's about $8 million per year. No, excuse me, which is about a little over $6 million per year. And he's going into his age 28-year-old season as well. The reason why I would bring in a guy like Noah Brown is because There aren't necessarily many big body receivers in this free agent market. The two that stuck out to me were Noah Brown and Josh Reynolds, who are essentially the same age. But I think that Noah Brown gives you a little bit more juice downfield. You saw that he was able to step up with the Houston Texans this season when Tank Dell went down. And he showed you that he was capable to produce with a young rookie quarterback, which I think that we'll be bringing with the number 2 pick. So that's what gave me the edge with Noah Brown. He's coming off of a season where he had about 600 yards. So, he was producing. And he's used to being in a role where he's the wide receiver 3, where he's the wide receiver 4. So as I started to look through a couple of articles, when I was thinking about putting Noah Brown's name here as a potential signing to Washington from the Texans and things of that nature, they were talking about how this is a guy who was used to his wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 role, but he was willing to even step up on special teams. This is a guy that was willing to do anything to help you contribute to winning on Sunday. So when you're once again trying to infiltrate a positive culture, these are the type of guys that you want to bring in. Because not only is he able of helping you on the field, but he's able of helping you off of it as well. So that'll do it for this episode of the Bleeding BnG podcast, guys. Let me know how you feel about our choices. Let me know how you feel about our picks. We gave you a lot of names, so you might not like all of them. You might not like some as much as you love others, but guess what? That's what the comment section is for. Infiltrate that, flood that comment section. Let us know how we did, and let us know what you would do if you were the potential GM of the Washington Commanders. As always, guys, follow our social medias, because I promise you, with this craziness as I'm expecting this week, we're going to be infiltrating all of the social media sites. Follow us on Twitter. Yes, we still call it Twitter because that's the name that his biological daddy gave it. Our Twitter handle is @BleedingBnG. That's BleedingBnG. Our Instagram is @BleedingBnG. That's BleedingBnG. BnG. So our Instagram handle is spelled a little more proper. As always, if you're checking us out on audio-only platforms such as Spotify, such as Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave a rating. Be sure to leave a review, preferably 5 stars, because that's how we finesse those algorithms so that when you're looking up anything Washington Commanders, you search in Bleeding BnG, we're the #1 content hub that comes up in your search bar. That's how we finesse those algorithms. And, man, be sure to check into the channel, man. I got a lot of content to be pushed out, and I'm only giving it to you guys because I love you. I love you. Thank you guys for tuning into this episode. Be sure to tap into the channel, and I'll check in on you guys later. Peace.